So, have you ever stopped to wonder about the invisible background software that's just secretly dictating your biggest life choices? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into some really fascinating insights from author Jaldip Shah, who writes a ton about conscious growth and identity. We're going to map out exactly how inherited beliefs run our lives. And I'm not talking about the beliefs you actively chose after, careful thought. I mean the ones you absorbed without even realizing it. These hidden instructions, they completely govern what you think is possible for yourself, what you're even allowed to want, and exactly where you set your limits. So if you've ever felt this mysterious ceiling on your ambition or your happiness, you are absolutely in the right place. Think about it for a second. Are you really making your own decisions? I mean, we all love to think we're entirely in the driver's seat of our lives, right? When you pick a career path or decide whether to ask for that raise or weigh the risks of a new project, you really feel like you're objectively weighing the facts. But here's the crazy part. Cognitive science suggests that up to 95% of our daily brain activity is entirely subconscious. The striking reality from our source material is that most of your choices were actually settled long before you had any say in the matter. Your brain makes these automatic calculations, instantly classifying an idea as realistic or maybe for someone else in a split second. And the kicker? Those calculations are based on data you didn't even input yourself. Okay, so where does all this automatic programming actually come from? Well, it all begins between the ages of 0 and 7. During this highly formative window, your brain was quite literally a sponge. You completely and uncritically absorbed a set of rules about exactly how the world works. You didn't evaluate these instructions. Honestly, you couldn't. You simply took them in as absolute truths just to help you survive and belong in your environment. These instructions dictated things like what money means, what success looks like, and what kinds of people achieve certain things. And the really wild part? Those instructions are still running, quietly, in the background today, heavily influencing the adult you are right now. So let's look at exactly where this inherited source code comes from, because it generally stems from four main installation points. First up is parental modeling, which is really all about what you observed. Second, we have community narratives. Those protective, almost tribal stories like, hey, people like us just don't do things like that. Third are formative experiences. Think early failures that practically branded themselves right into your memory. And fourth, cultural and religious frameworks. These install incredibly deep-seated rules about worthiness, suffering, and the whole relationship between effort and reward. Because all of this came to you so early and so thoroughly, they powerfully shape your life without ever actually feeling like beliefs. They just feel like undeniable facts. Let's zoom in on that first source for a second, parental modeling. There is very often a massive, glaring gap between what parents explicitly tell you and what they actually do. Think about it. As a child, you didn't learn your deepest lessons about risk or money from the lectures they gave you at the dinner table. No, you learned from the automatic behavior you watched them do every day. If a parent treated money as something constantly precarious, or maybe treated ambition as this dangerous thing, well, that became your baseline understanding of reality. This type of modeling actually predates language itself. It bypasses your logical brain entirely and writes itself straight into your core operating system. Or consider how a single, seemingly small formative experience can echo for literally decades. Picture this, you're 10 years old. You experience a sharp, really painful public humiliation. Maybe you gave a wrong answer in front of the class, and everybody laughed. In that exact moment, a quiet, operating instruction about visibility gets installed in your brain. Being seen is dangerous. Now, fast forward to age 20. You find yourself avoiding speaking up or taking any risks in college. Jump to age 35, and you're unconsciously passing up leadership roles at work. You aren't consciously sitting there thinking about being 10 years old. Instead, that early failure is just running undisturbed as a background program, supposedly keeping you safe, but actually, it's keeping you incredibly stuck. This brings us to a crucial point we have to confront. What happens when these beliefs disguise themselves? Listen, the absolute most dangerous category of inherited beliefs are not the ones that feel super emotional or irrational. Not at all. They're the ones that wear the costume of rationality. They disguise themselves as pragmatic facts. We call this the trap of realism. When your internal monologue tells you, hey, I'm just being practical, or I'm just facing facts, you really feel like you're making a clear-eyed assessment of reality. But very often, you're actually just echoing an inherited belief that is severely limiting your potential. Jaldip Shah puts this brilliantly. He says, the most dangerous beliefs are the ones that present themselves as facts. You cannot question a fact. You can only question a belief. I mean, just think about that for a second. If you believe the sky is blue, you don't waste time trying to paint it green, right? When someone else's unexamined fear is internalized by you as an absolute, undeniable truth, a fact of life,
You just stop trying to break through the ceiling. Because you don't fight a fact, you just surrender to it.
So, how does this trap of realism actually show up in our daily lives? Let's be honest, we've all heard or probably used these exact justifications, like setting a quote-unquote realistic ceiling on the salary you ask for, simply because nobody in your family has ever made more than that. Or finding a perfectly practical reason not to write that book or start that business, blaming the economy or bad timing. Or maybe making a completely sensible argument for staying in a job that bores you to tears just because it pays the bills. In the moment, these statements feel incredibly coherent and defensible. But if we scratch the surface, they are very often just the voice of someone else's fear echoing right there in your own head. Now you might be wondering, why are these illusions so incredibly durable? Why can't we just snap out of it? Well, to understand that, we have to look at the brain's ultimate defense mechanism, confirmation bias. You see, our minds absolutely crave cognitive consistency, mostly because consistency feels safe. Confirmation bias is essentially the tendency to notice, remember, and give a lot of weight to any evidence that supports your existing beliefs, while at the same time completely ignoring or heavily discounting any evidence that contradicts them. Your mind is actively working round the clock to preserve that original software that was installed when you were just a kid. And all of this creates an active, everyday cycle that we call the belief maintenance loop. Let's walk through it together. Step 1, the belief gets installed. Let's say it's something like, I am not good with money. Step 2, the filter is applied. Because of that confirmation bias we just talked about, you now vividly notice every single little financial mistake you make. But what if you make a really great financial decision? You just dismiss it as dumb luck. Then, step 3, you select the evidence, basically accumulating a mountain of proof that you really are terrible with finances. And finally, step 4, the belief is reinforced. You look at it all and tell yourself, see, I was right about myself all along. It's an automatic, self-perpetuating cycle where your belief actually selects its own evidence just to make sure it survives. Okay, so how do we actually break this loop? It all starts with a really profound personal realization. There is a massive, fundamental difference between an inherited identity and a chosen identity. Listen closely. Your beliefs are not you. They are simply things you hold. And things that are held can always be put down. An identity that's assembled from inherited, borrowed material, like the limits your parents or your community gave you, is really just a starting point. It is absolutely not a destiny. You are the consciousness beneath those instructions, and you have the power right now to examine these held beliefs, question them, and ultimately replace them. The very first step in actually rewriting this mental software is to explicitly name the underlying belief. We do this thing where we constantly confuse vague feelings for concrete beliefs. For example, simply saying, I feel anxious about this opportunity. Well, that's incredibly hard to dismantle. Why? Because it's just a feeling. But if you stop and realize, wait, I believe I will embarrass myself if I try something I haven't mastered. Now that is a concrete instruction you can actually work with. By separating the superficial emotion from the concrete instruction, you drag that invisible software out into the light, where you can finally examine it for what it is. So how do we go about actually unlearning this stuff? Jaldip Shah outlines 4 actionable steps for what he calls honest archaeology. Step 1. Name the belief explicitly. Turn it from a vague feeling into a concrete instruction. Step 2. Trace its origin. Ask yourself, when did I first encounter this? Who did I actually borrow this from? Was it just my parents' fear from a totally different economic era? Step 3. Test it against genuine, objective evidence. Does this belief really hold up to scrutiny today, or is it based on one bad experience from when you were 12? And finally, step 4, act against it deliberately. Beliefs are maintained by experience, so they have to be disrupted by experience. By taking even a small action that contradicts the belief, you create new data points. You literally overwrite the old code and begin to unlearn the limitations you never asked for in the first place. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a really crucial question to think about today. What will you build now that you know how to rewrite the code? Because the truth is, you simply cannot grow into a life you genuinely want if you're operating on beliefs designed for a life someone else expected of you. I won't lie, the excavation work is hard, but it clears the ground for a life that is authentically, unapologetically yours. So take a hard look at the rules you live by and ask yourself, what is actually yours to choose? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this sparks some honest archaeology of your own.